1955 was a pivotal year in motorsport history. In Grand Prix racing, Juan Manuel Fangio was back to defend his world championship for Mercedes. Alongside in the W196 was rising British driver Stirling Moss, who proved his ability in 1954 with Maserati. The Trident had to search around for a new team leader, and the choice was Frenchman Jean Bérard. Ferrari had Nino Farina and Maurice Trintignant under contract, and Lancia had 1952 and 53 world champion Alberto Ascari. (1955) was to be one of the great seasons in sports car racing, with a world championship contested over 6 races. Mercedes-Benz, Jaguar, Ferrari, Maserati and Aston Martin were all contenders. The dominant team was Mercedes-Benz, with their 3-litre straight-8 300 SLR, a direct development of the W196, designed by Rudolf Uhlenhaut, superbly prepared and organised by team manager Alfred Neubauer. Jaguar, as always, concentrated on Le Mans, with Malcolm Sayers' aerodynamic D-type, with plenty of power from the punchy 3.4-litre 6-cylinder engine, the perfect Le Mans contender. Ferrari raced the fast but unreliable 4.4-litre 6-cylinder. For once, it was not to be Ferrari's year. Aston Martin, under the technical direction of John Wyer, was going to struggle with their 3-litre straight 6. Motorsport competition in 1955 began with the world's oldest and most famous rally, the Monte Carlo. The final stage of the Monte Carlo rally used the race circuit for a quick sprint. Starting from Oslo, Per Malling and Gunnar Faldum won in their Sunbeam Talbot. The World Championship began in the blazing heat of Buenos Aires for the Argentinian Grand Prix. Fangio's popularity and the Perón government's engagement with the wider world made sure the race was on the calendar. Stirling Moss was confident that he would be able to cope with Fangio. 1951 champion Nino Farina started the race with the help of pain-killing injections. Fangio took the lead, followed by Alberto Ascari in the Lancia D50 until he spun on some oil. Fangio burnt his right leg just by brushing against part of the chassis as he cornered. The oven-like temperatures were too much for his rivals, who had to share cars. Fangio was one of only 2 drivers to drive right through the race alone, putting up with the tarmac melting temperatures generated in the front-engine cars, where all the heat blew onto the driver. Fangio resorted to thinking about lying in snow to maintain his concentration. He was chased to the finish by a Ferrari driven by Gonzalez, Farina and Trintignant. Racing returned to Europe and the 1,000-mile Mille Miglia. The great Italian road race was held on May the 1st. The numbers on the cars are the start times, and in the Mercedes 300 SLR, Fangio drives alone. Stirling Moss had Dennis Jenkinson alongside. Jenkinson was a journalist and a world champion sidecar passenger. They introduced the idea of pace notes, having reconnoitred the roads, and made notes of the route on a long roll of paper. 7:22 a.m. and Moss and Jenkinson leave Brescia. In the race, Jenks relayed the pace notes to Moss with hand signals, so he was able to take blind corners at higher speeds than would otherwise have been the case. Down the Adriatic coast, across the Apennine Mountains and to Rome for a refueling stop. They led at Rome and defied conventional wisdom that said that those who led at Rome were never first home. Moss and Jenkinson drove the 1,000 miles in just over 10 hours, a stupendous effort. A week after this heroic drive, Stirling Moss was at Silverstone for the Daily Express International Trophy, an important meeting of the time, second only to the British Grand Prix. Private Maseratis were entered for Stirling Moss, Roy Salvadori, Peter Collins and Prince Bira of Siam. They were up against the new breed of British Grand Prix cars, Connaught and Van Wall. In the opening laps, the Maseratis were closely matched with the British cars, but so hot was the pace that several of the fastest cars fell out, and the race became a battle between Salvadori and Collins. Mike Hawthorne retired the van wall. Peter Collins fought a race-long duel with Salvadori until he was able to pull away late in the race. Mike Hawthorne joined Jaguar for sports and saloon car racing in 1955, replacing Stirling Moss. Drivers could compete for different Grand Prix and sports car companies at the same time. Saloon car racing was still a novelty in 1955. The big Mark VII Jaguars led the way. The sports car race at the International Trophy meeting was a Jaguar versus Aston Martin battle, with Mike Spence's Ferrari Continental opposition. Mike Hawthorne took the lead in the D-Type soon after the start and led for 37 of the 40 laps. He set a record on lap 32, but just 3 laps from the end, his radiator hose burst. He stopped, found that the engine wasn't overheating, and crawled round in 4th place. Finishing ahead of him were the Aston Martins of Reg Parnell and Roy Salvadori, and Tony Rolt in 3rd. Grand Prix racing returned to Monaco in 1955 after a 4-year break for the second round of the World Championship. Mercedes was setting the pace, but Alberto Ascari was in the middle of the front row in the Vittorio Jano-designed Lancia D50. The Ferraris were well down the grid. Away from the start, Farina lost a lap, having a wheel changed after a collision. Fangio led until he retired his Mercedes at half distance with a failed transmission. That left Stirling Moss in front of Ascari. But Moss retired on lap 81 with broken valve gear on the Mercedes, a rare event when mechanical problems claimed both cars. Alberto Ascari took over the lead, but when his Lancia's brakes failed at the chicane, he plunged into the harbour. Rescue launches and frogmen rushed to the scene as Ascari came to the surface. After all this excitement, Maurice Trintignant won the race for Ferrari. Four days after this dramatic race at Monaco, the motor racing world was in shock when it was announced that Alberto Ascari was dead at the age of 36. He had visited Monza and taken a casual drive in a sports Ferrari of his friend Eugenio Castellotti. He had a fatal accident which was never fully explained, and he died in the arms of his racing mentor, Luigi Villoresi. Milan came to a standstill for the funeral, a day of national mourning for the 1952 and 53 world champion. Alberto Ascari's death stunned Italy, and Fangio lost a good friend and rival. The shock of Ascari's death, coupled with Lancia's financial difficulties, caused them to withdraw from all forms of racing. The entire Lancia team, 6 D50s, engines, spares and blueprints, were handed over to Enzo Ferrari, who ran them in 1956-57 as Lancia Ferraris. A somber mood prevailed at the next Grand Prix, the Belgian at Spa-Francorchamps. It was at this race that Fangio and Moss agreed to put the team first and not to race each other. Fangio took the lead halfway around lap 1, followed very closely by Moss. Stirling learnt by following the master and became a better driver for it. The 14-kilometre track ran along roads below the village of Francorchamps. down the valley of a stream called Eau Rouge, and then up to the crest of a hill at Les Combes. Fangio and Moss finished first and second, then Nino Farina third for Lancia in his final race. Belgian motoring journalist Paul Frère was fourth for Ferrari. The premier sports car race of the year was Le Mans. Jaguar, Ferrari and Aston Martin arrived at Le Mans to face the might of Mercedes. The German team returned with 3 of their 300 SLR models, which had been further developed by now having a novel air brake. This had been tried on the 300 SL, but here at Le Mans, a tonneau panel behind the driver was raised by a hydraulic ram activated by the driver. This innovation was to offset the advantage held by Jaguar and other teams with disc brakes. Pierre Levesque, who had lost the race to Mercedes in 1952, was partnering the American John Fitch. Frenchman André Simon partnered Carl Kling, and Stirling Moss was placed with Fangio. Their closest rivals were the Jaguars. The Ferrari of Valiant and Ibanez had won the opening round of the World Championship in Argentina in January. Mike Hawthorne and American Phil Walters had won the Sebring 12-hour race in March for Jaguar, so the Italian, English and German teams were tied 1-1 in the Sports Car World Championship. The D-types had long nose bodywork. Their drivers included Mike Hawthorne and Ivor Bourb, and the 1953 winners Tony Rolt and Duncan Hamilton. The Works Ferrari team were the 121 LMs. Aston Martin entered 3 DB3Ss and 1 Lagonda V12. There was a tremendous feeling of expectation at the start. The first car away was Castellotti's Ferrari, followed closely by Mike Hawthorne's Jaguar. Fangio's Mercedes and Tony Rolt's Jaguar had both made poor starts, but quickly made up for lost time. Hawthorne caught and passed Castellotti and was soon joined by Fangio. They drove as if it was a sprint race in one of the most exciting battles ever seen at Le Mans, passing and repassing. Castellotti's Ferrari was beginning to drop back. The lap record was broken time after time, and finally went to Hawthorne at 200 kilometers an hour. The Fangio-Hawthorne battle continued until just after 6 o'clock, when disaster struck. Mike Hawthorne was the first driver expected to make his pit stop, and passed Lance Macklin's Austin Healey before pulling over to the right side of the road. Macklin swerved to the left, but in doing so put his car in the path of Levesque's Mercedes. Levesque hit the Austin Healey's tail and deflected across the track, hitting the safety barrier. Levesque was killed instantly, but the engine and other parts of the wreckage were flung over the barrier and into the crowd with horrific results. In the initial moments after the disaster, confusion was total, and it was only later that the full horrors became apparent. Hawthorne's Jaguar had lost a lap to the Moss-Fangio Mercedes. The race organisers made the correct decision to let the race continue, as 200,000 spectators leaving the circuit would have slowed the rescue operation. The teams did their best to continue to race, despite what they could see across the track. After prolonged consultations between the Mercedes team manager, Alfred Neubauer, and a hastily assembled board meeting at Daimler-Benz in Stuttgart, it was decided at 2 a.m. to withdraw the 2 remaining Mercedes as a mark of respect to the victims of the disaster. At the time, the Moss-Fangio Mercedes was ahead, so this gave Jaguar the lead. The Rolt-Hamilton Jaguar had to retire with a gearbox problem, so this promoted the Peter Collins-Paul Frère Aston Martin into second place. At the end of motorsport's saddest weekend, Mike Hawthorne and Ivor Bourb took a joyless win for Jaguar. The aftermath of the 1955 Le Mans 24-hour race disaster was a temporary ban on all racing in France, Spain and Germany, and a permanent one in Switzerland. Motor racing was saved by the courageous decision of the Dutch to run their Grand Prix at Zandvoort just a week after the disaster. Strict rules were enforced about pit stops, and there was no problem in the race. Despite concerns from team manager Neubauer about Moss running too closely behind Fangio and sand being sucked into his car's engine, Stirling Moss followed Fangio for a 1-2. Ferrari's Luigi Musso was third. The British Grand Prix took place at the Grand National Horse Racing Track at Aintree near Liverpool. It was a sunny Saturday in July as the drivers were presented to the massive crowd that had come from all over Britain to watch the race.
Die Rennfahrer werden vorgestellt. Fangio.
It was always going to be between Fangio and Moss. No one else was close.
Kling.
Moss led at the start until Fangio took a turn at the front. The Maserati challenge, led by Jean Bera, ended in a trail of smoke. Moss then retook the lead, which he kept to the flag, to win by half a car's length, winning his first World Championship Grand Prix. Fangio was close behind.
He's such a gentleman, I can't find out. I mean, all I know is I finished up with half a car length ahead. But I don't know. He said, no, you were on form that day and you beat me. I do know that I went round the last corner first and I put my foot flat on the floor. I pulled over and waved him by, knowing he couldn't pass me, unless he had another 50 horsepower, which you don't get with Mercedes. But I don't know. I really don't know. The point was we were first and second and I was in the lead. That's what matters.
The 1955 Goodwood 9-hour race wasn't part of the World Championship. Mike Hawthorne's Monza Ferrari led away at the Sussex circuit, pursued by Jaguars and Aston Martins. Reg Parnell retired his Aston after only 3 laps with a broken hub, and Tony Rolt retired his D-Type in his last race. Mike Hawthorne broke the lap record, but lost a lot of time in the pits. For the rest of the race, there was a stirring battle for the lead between the Ecurie Écosse D-Type of Desmond Titterington and Ninian Sanderson and the Collins Brooks and Walker Poor Astons. Titterington left the road to avoid a slower car and broke a headlight, which slowed him down later in the race. Peter Walker and Dennis Poor went on to win for Aston Martin. After the Le Mans tragedy, the 1955 World Championship finished its shortened season at Monza, the Italian GP being the final round. And the banked track was back. In 1955, it was decided to rebuild the banking. A complete lap was 10 kilometers long. A loop with 2 banked curves was built, following the 1922 plan, except that the track was set back on the south side to allow for an underpass, and there was an intersection with the road circuit similar to the original one. Mercedes decided that Fangio and Moss should drive the latest version of enclosed cars, while Kling and Taruffi had open ones. Fangio led from start to finish, followed by Moss until his engine failed. Carl Kling retired, leaving Fangio to win from Piero Taruffi by just 0.7 of a second. Fangio was crowned world champion for the 3rd time. Stirling Moss was 2nd, with Eugenio Castellotti 3rd, and Maurice Trintignant 4th for Ferrari. While the World Drivers' Championship season was over, the Sports Car Championship had 2 rounds to go. The Tourist Trophy was held on the fearsome Dundrod Road Circuit in Ulster. In the lone D-Type Jaguar, Mike Hawthorne was partnered by young Ulsterman Desmond Titterington. Stirling Moss had John Fitch alongside in the Mercedes. Belfast driver Titterington, who was on his own home ground, led in the D-Type. Stirling Moss retook the lead from Hawthorne. Peter Collins, who got as far as third in the Aston Martin, had a long pit stop before handing over to Tony Brooks. The Aston Martin was soon to retire with a broken conrod bolt. The Tourist Trophy at Dundrod in 1955 was the last car race on this difficult and challenging circuit. A serious accident claimed the lives of 2 drivers. The Jaguar faded against a virtuoso performance by Stirling Moss. A rare Jaguar engine failure robbed them of second place, and Mike Hawthorne walked back to the pits. Stirling Moss and John Fitch, the winners at Dundrod. The final major race of the year was the Targa Florio, held in Sicily. Based in Palermo, the 80-kilometre laps could be learned, although there were always unexpected hazards like donkey carts and people wandering on the roads. Peter Collins' efforts with Aston Martin had seen him invited to join Mercedes for the race, sharing with Stirling Moss.
Stirling Moss fuhr draufgängerisch wie immer. Sein Wagen zeigt.
They set the pace through the race and finished ahead of teammates Fangio and Kling.
Collins übernimmt den Wagen seines Landsmannes.
The victory helped secure for Mercedes the Sports Car World Championship. Second overall were Ferrari, followed by Jaguar, Maserati and Aston Martin.
Moss Collins und Fangio Kling gelingt der große Wurf. Auch die Weltmeisterschaft für Rennsportwagen gehört Daimler-Benz.
A week after returning from the Targa Florio, on 22nd of October 1955, Daimler-Benz AG announced in Stuttgart that the Mercedes team was to withdraw from motor racing. They decided they'd amassed enough data in 2 years of racing to last their production department for years to come. A short era of professionalism had come to an end, with success tinged with tragedy at Le Mans. The Mercedes drivers would have to find new teams to join. Fangio thought initially of retiring and returning to his motor business and interests in Argentina. But in September 1955, the Libertarian Revolution had taken place in Argentina and unseated the government of General Perón. Political and financial instability at home meant that Fangio would stay in Europe and keep racing into 1956.